All right, so we've written our speech openers. Now it's time to sort of like ride that momentum through the body of your speeches. The purpose of the body of your speech is to develop and support the opinion that you've established in that thesis statement. We can do this in at least two different ways. Let me just think about these as two primary options, which of course can, be blended to form other options as well. For the sake of simplicity, let's take option A. Option A is just a series of points or claims that help to further develop your particular opinion statement or your thesis. So for example, here's my first point, or perhaps we think of this as my first reason for why I believe that this is right. And we want to provide supporting evidence and explanation to that point. Followed up with a second, maybe even a third point, or counterclaim and rebuttal if that's relevant. And then we bring it home with our conclusion and call to action. Perfectly acceptable, probably one of the more traditional routes to go. Now, depending upon who your audience is, you may want to try option B. If your audience from the get-go is of the opposite opinion of you, so they totally do not sympathize with your particular opinion and your job is to bring them around to your point of view, you may want to try a series of counterclaims and rebuttals. The cool thing about this approach is you are actually sort of breaking down their preconceived notions, and then you're providing evidence as to why those are inaccurate and why your position is actually the better position to take. This is awesome because you prove yourself as being very knowledgeable and aware of your audience and the things that they think and feel. And then you are very cleverly deconstructing those and replacing them with your positions. So again, think about either one of these. Neither one is better than the other. It's simply a matter of what is going to help you to best and most effectively make the argument you want to make. Now, once you've decided the basic structure of your argument, here are a few considerations that you want to keep in mind as you begin drafting the body of your speech. Number one, we want to choose the most important points to make. Da Vinci said simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Sometimes we think, less is less, but the truth is less can certainly be more because it allows your audience to really focus in on the points that you do make. So you don't need to make 16 different points in defense of your opinion. 3 will do. We also want to remember that we can't try to tackle everything in one speech. We want to focus only on what is most important to your selected audience. So if you find yourself in a position of having more points than you can feasibly make within one speech, really ask yourself which one of these is going to be most effective to the specific audience that I've identified. And the next thing I want you to keep in mind is to add supporting details to further illustrate each point. It's not enough just to state claims in defense of your larger thesis. You need to back them up. So we want to provide a variety of evidence. That includes things like facts, statistics, expert testimony, anecdotes, metaphors and analogies, concrete examples. We don't want to use the same types of evidence all the time because it gets kind of tired. So you want to make sure that you're pulling different types of evidence in to really give yourself a well-rounded argument that's going to be very persuasive to your audience. We also want to be aware of the importance of transitions, kind of like the oil that we put in the engine of our car. Our engine ain't going to be running very long if we do not have a nice, smooth flow of oil. And we want to make sure that we are incorporating transition words and phrases into our writing, both between paragraphs and within paragraphs, in order for our audience to logically be able to move along with us from one idea to another. My last bit of advice for you is to maintain your own voice. A lot of times in student writing, we doubt the power and the credibility of our own written voice, and we overpack our writing with quotations and the work of others. Really lean into your own voice. It is important, of course, to add external information in support of our points, but make sure that we don't lose that balance between your voice and the voice of others. The power to paraphrase some of that evidence allows you to really retain that balance, because you still get the benefit of the evidence, but we keep it communicated through your voice, which is the most important voice in this speech. As you're writing these body paragraphs, if you are looking for inspiration, looks to the likes of Steve Jobs' Stanford commencement address, or Coretta Scott King's The Death Penalty is a Step Back. Even FDR's infamy speech. Each of these three examples do an excellent job of really developing their larger thesis statement in ways that are very, very specific to their particular audiences. So if you find yourself running dry for ideas, check out any of these three speeches and see if you can't use them as inspiration to create your own version of them in your speech. All right, now let's take a look at one or two examples of body paragraphs just to kind of give ourselves an idea of what we're trying to produce. Our mastery criteria for this particular section, that's just going to cover 4 learning targets, are on the left-hand side of the screen. Feel free to pause the video momentarily just to read through that criteria. In short, we want to make sure that we have at minimum within our writing 3 distinct claims. Distinct means different. We don't want to make the same point over and over again, just in slightly different words. We also want to make sure that our claims are clearly communicated within the first 1 or 2 sentences of our paragraphs. We know that we need to use a variety of evidence to support our ideas and our points. We need to have transition words and phrases both within and between paragraphs just to make sure there's a nice logical flow. And then we also want to make sure that we are incorporating all 3 rhetorical appeals and at least 3 original rhetorical devices. That means we are coming up with our own metaphors, our own anaphoras. So make sure that we're keeping that in mind as we draft. All right, so let's take a look at the body paragraph on the board. And as we do, I want you to be thinking to yourself, what are this paragraph's strengths? What are its weaknesses? This writer has written, not only is this ban Islamophobic, it is blatantly sexist. How so? Let's take practicing Orthodox Jewish men and women, for example. They often cover their hair as well. Some women cover their hair with wigs and some men cover it with a yarmulke, which is a piece of cloth. The hijab is also a piece of cloth. So what's the difference? Is it because the wigs look like real hair? Or is it because of misogyny? Muslim men also visibly practice their religion by some of the clothes that they wear. Are they not oppressed too? Is it a choice for them? Still not convinced? All right, how about the 2018 Men's World Cup? The cup was won by a group of French, mostly Muslim players. How is it that France takes pride in their team but tries to hide the same aspect when it comes to women? So let's go ahead, let's think to ourselves, in what ways does this particular paragraph meet the criteria to the left? And what are maybe some potential areas for refinement? One of the first things that I notice is this awesome transition. I can already tell that we are moving from one idea into a new one. Not only is, right? So I'm assuming that there was a paragraph that came right before this that was addressing the idea of Islamophobia in connection to this, this piece of legislation. But we are now moving into a new claim that this piece of legislation is blatantly sexist. We've got it right here in the very first sentence. So not only do we have a nice transition, but we have a very clear claim. I also really love the way that this writer has utilized rhetorical questions to really challenge the audience to think and consider their points. There's also a lot of logos embedded here, comparisons between different types of head coverings and different religions. So I think some really interesting use of rhetoric here. One thing that I think could probably be explained just a little bit more is this last point about the World Cup and how this is relevant to their point of this being, a sexist piece of legislation. So maybe a little bit more explanation here, but overall, pretty interesting and persuasive body paragraph. All right, one more just for interest's sake. This writer says, first off, the main problem is not that there are no healthy foods at all, but that they are too expensive for the people in those areas to buy. The NCBI says for every 1 standard deviation increase in the price of healthy food to unhealthy food, the odds of having a high quality diet increased by 24%. This means that healthier foods are 14% higher, and because of this, the chance of having a good diet is decreased by another 24%. Therefore, the idea of just putting more vegetables in stores would not make much of a difference because of the price. All right, go back, reread this to yourself. What are this paragraph's strengths? What are their weaknesses? All right, so we see here at the beginning, nice transition phrase, first off. This definitely indicates to me as the listener that this is one of their first claims. And then we have a pretty clearly stated claim. The main problem is not that there are no healthy foods at all, but that they are too expensive for people in certain areas to buy. All right, so now we're addressing the issue of food expense. Excellent point. Now we need to back it up. This writer introduces their evidence. So again, nice transition. The NCBI says, and they move into their quote and statistic. Now, one thing I'm left wondering is, who is NCBI? It's very clear that the speaker probably knows who this organization is, but me as the audience, I don't have a clue. So you want to really make sure that you're being very, very clear and that things that are evident to you are definitely made evident to your audience. The other flaw that I'm seeing is that despite they've made a clear attempt to incorporate statistics and logos, which should be very persuasive, they have not effectively explained the relevance of this statistic. They've made an attempt to. This means that. Great impulse there, but then their explanation does not accurately explain this particular statistic. So even though they have a statistic in here, because of the lack of explanation, it's not really supporting their point as effectively as it might if they were to really accurately interpret this piece of evidence for their audience. So be on the lookout for that as well.